I would like to apologize once again for the delay. My name is Jan Orlovsky from the Open Society Foundation. You are really a great and patient audience because 40 minutes delay is really substantial. But since there have been a number of meetings and events throughout Slovakia, this delay has been caused also due to this situation. But let me mention one thing, one slogan that I like very much, that democracy is an opportunity for something that we are able to procure by ourselves. Unfortunately, for years, we have looked upon a golden standard, the United States, Western Europe, and we thought that this is what we would like to look like once, but we have realized that everywhere we look, there are problems. Like in Spain, for example, recently the rightists, the extreme right-wing party, obtained a huge increase in the votes, and this is really very unfortunate development. Zygmunt Bauman, in his recent paper, wrote that this is the first time when we look into the future, not with hope, but with fear. This is the first time that it happens in our history. There are so many challenges, be it climate change or changes on the labor market or threats to democracy, migration. There are things that are greater than ourselves. We sometimes look like we would like to prevent the rain from coming, but the rain will come. Last year, Svetlana Alexievich spoke here at this podium. She is a great author, Nobel Prize winner for literature. She spoke about how Russian and Belarusian women experience today's situation. Today, we have a guest from Nigeria who comes from a different cultural environment, and she will share with us her feelings about how the society evolves. Yesterday, our president spoke about the situation in Slovakia, and without further ado, I would like to invite Ms. Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie to take to the podium.
Ďakujem pekne. Dnešným večerom ju bude sprevádzať holandský.
She will be accompanied by Keulemans, Dutch writer who spoke a while ago at the Freedom Square. And we are very happy that you are such a disciplined audience who are so patiently who have so patiently waited for this meeting to begin. Keulemans. But before getting into Chimamanda's story and her books, I also would like to invite to the podium the Slovak National Theatre actor Zuzana Fialová, who is going to read two excerpts from Chimamanda's works. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. First of all, I would like to say that I am very happy to have been invited to this great evening. A while ago, we have all met at the square celebrating 30 years of freedom and democracy. It is great that 30 years later, we still have to fight for freedom, and this struggle for freedom and for human rights is something that should be part of our daily existence. There are people who are doing this almost at a professional level, and I am very happy that I can introduce to you a woman who has who's fought racism, chauvinism practically on a daily basis. She will tell us how to face fear, how to deal with fear, because fear is one of the topics of this forum. Ladies and gentlemen, may I now read one excerpt, the first excerpt from her book, Amerikánka. Dear non-black Americans, if a black American tells you about her experience and about how it is to be black, don't bring up examples from your own life. Don't say it's just like when you have suffered. Everyone in the world has suffered. And if something happens, do not be quick to find alternative explanations. Don't say, oh, it's not really race, it's class. Oh, it's not race, it's gender. Oh, it's not race, it's the Cookie Monster. You see, American blacks actually don't want it to be race. They would rather not have racist shit happen. So maybe when they say something is about race, it's maybe because it actually is. Don't say, I am colorblind, because if you are colorblind, then you need to see a doctor. And it means that when a black man is shown on TV as a crime suspect in your neighborhood, all you see is a blurry, purplish, grayish, creamish figure. Don't say we are tired of talking about race, or the only race is the human race. American blacks, too, are tired of talking about race. They wish they didn't have to. But shit keeps happening. Don't preface your response with, one of my best friends is black, because it makes no difference. And nobody cares. And you can have a black best friend and still do racist shit. And it's probably not true anyway, the best part, nor the friend part. Don't say your grandfather was Mexican, so you can't be racist. There is no United League of the Oppressed. Don't bring up your Irish great-grandparents' suffering. Of course, they caught a lot of shit from established America. So did the Italians. So did the Eastern Europeans. But there was a hierarchy. 100 years ago, the white ethnics hated being hated, but it was sort of tolerable because at least black people were below them on the ladder. Don't say your grandfather was a serf in Russia when slavery happened, because what matters is you are American now, and being American means you take the whole shebang, America's assets and America's debts. Don't say it's just like anti-Semitism. It's not. In the hatred of Jews, there is also the possibility of envy. They are so clever, these Jews. They control everything, these Jews. And one must concede that a certain respect, however grudging, accompanies envy. In the hatred of American blacks, there is no possibility of envy. Don't say our racism is over. Slavery was so long ago.
zo 60. rokoch 20.
We are talking about problems of the 1960s, not 1860s. If you meet an elderly American black man from Alabama, he probably remembers when he had to step off the curb because a white person was walking past. I bought a dress from a vintage shop on eBay on the other day, made 1960, in perfect shape, and I wear it a lot. When the original owner wore it, black American could not vote because they were black, and maybe the original owner was one of those women in the famous sepia photographs standing by in hordes outside schools shouting "ape" at young black children because they didn't want them to go to school with their young white children. Where are those women now? Do they sleep well? Do they think about shouting "ape"? And finally, don't put on a "let's be fair" and say, but black people are racist too. Because, of course, we are all prejudiced. I can't even stand some of my blood relatives grasping selfish folks. But racism is about the power of a group. And in America, it's white folks who have that power. How? Well, white folks don't get treated like shit in upper-class African-American communities, and white folks don't get denied bank loans on mortgages precisely because they are white, and black juries don't give white criminals worse sentences than black criminals for the same crime, and black police officers don't stop white folk for driving while white, and black companies don't choose not to hire somebody because their name sounds white, and black teachers don't tell white kids that they're not smart enough to be doctors, and black politicians don't try some tricks to reduce the voting power of white folks through gerrymandering, and advertising agencies don't say they can't use white models to advertise glamorous products because they are not considered aspirational by the mainstream. So after this listing of don'ts, what's the do? I'm not sure. Try listening, maybe hear what is being said, and remember that it is not about you. American blacks are not telling you that you are to blame. They are just telling you what is. If you don't understand, ask questions. If you are uncomfortable about asking questions, say you are uncomfortable about asking questions, and then ask anyway. It's easy to tell when a question is coming from a good place. Then listen some more. Sometimes people just want to feel heard. Here is two possibilities of friendship and connection and understanding.
I love you. Je proste skvelá, je proste úžasná. A dovolte, zo môjho osobného pohľadu som si dovolila poprosiť organizátorov.
I took the liberty of asking the organizers of this trip against fear to read a short excerpts from the book We All Should Be Feminists, because I am personally concerned about it. I myself have been exposed to this problem, so I believe that this is a very highly pertinent message for all of us. Ladies and gentlemen, now an excerpt from the book We All Should Be Feminists. I decided not to apologize no longer for my femininity, and I want to be respected in all my femaleness because I deserve to be. I like politics and history, and I am happiest when having a good argument about ideas. I am girly, I am happily girly. I like high heels and trying on lipsticks. It's nice to be complimented by both men and women, although I have to be honest and say that I prefer the compliments of stylish women. But I often wear clothes that men don't like or don't understand. I wear them because I like them and because I feel good in them. The male gaze as a shaper of my life's choices is largely incidental. Gender is not an easy conversation to have. It makes people uncomfortable, sometimes even irritable. Both men and women are resistant to talk about gender or are quick to dismiss the problems of gender because thinking of changing the status quo is always uncomfortable. Some people ask, why the word feminist? Why not just say you are a believer in human rights or something like that? Because that would be dishonest. Feminism is, of course, part of human rights in general, but to choose to use the vague expression human rights is to deny the specific and particular problem of gender. It would be a way of pretending that it was not women who have for centuries been excluded. It would be a way of denying that the problem of gender targets women, that the problem was not about being human, but specifically about being a female human. For centuries, the world divided human beings into two groups and then proceeded to exclude and oppress one group. It is only fair that the solution to the problem should acknowledge that. Some men feel threatened by the idea of feminism. This comes, I think, from the insecurity triggered by how boys are brought up, how their sense of self-worth is diminished if they are not naturally in charge as men. Other men might respond by saying, okay, this is interesting, but I don't think like that. I don't even think about gender. Maybe not. And that is part of the problem, that many men do not actively think about gender or notice gender. That many men say, like my friend Louis did, that things might have been bad in the past, but everything is fine now. And that many men do nothing to change it. If you are a man and you walk into a restaurant and the waiter greets just you, does it occur to you to ask the waiter, why have you not greeted her? Men need to speak out in all these ostensibly small situations because gender can be uncomfortable. There are easy ways to close this conversation.
Iní zase povedia, no a čo chudobní muži, tí to tiež majú ťažké? Áno, to je pravda.
Some people may say that about poor people, they also do it, but poor people are still more advantaged, although they do not have the privilege. There are different systems of oppression, which I understood when talking to several black men. When we spoke about gender, I asked them why, or they asked, why should this concern you as a man? Why, as a woman, why should not be a human issue? Yes, I am a human, but some things happen to me in my life just because I am a woman. Thank you for your attention.
To bolo naozaj veľmi krásne čítanie.
It was beautiful reading. Thank you very much for this experience. And this is the second time that we are awarding a person with the prize of Central European. Before we give this to Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie, I would like to invite Mária Modrovich to deliver her Laudatio. Good evening.
Začnem citátom.
I will start with a quotation. Suggestion 8. Teach her to reject likability. Her job is not to make herself likable. Her job is to be her full self, a self that is honest and aware of the equal humanity of other people. There are several reasons why Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie has achieved major international literary stardom. One is the fact that she represents a generation of authors, male and female, who have managed to put their country on the map, to set present-day Nigeria apart from the rest of Africa. And now imagine that if Slovak literature made it unnecessary for us to explain that the city of Ljubljana is somewhere else, quickly adding, and Slovakia starts just a few kilometers from Vienna, but to say that Ngozi Adichie presents to us a certain, however rich Nigerian experience would not be enough. The author and her characters spent part of their lives in America as a dream destination, an epitome of Western civilization, and they frequently comment and criticize the American way of life. The duality and rather diversity of her writing and thinking has been transformed into the way she raises subjects to universal significance. what distinguishes her from most Western authors is her fearless directness, her sincerity is a vaccine against the soft, evasive explanations and nuances behind which we hide our rigid attitudes, our fear of speaking our minds. When we read Ngozi Adichie, not only we are confronted with a different race, but first and foremost with our own racism. She compels us to set aside our lack of patience and condescensions and look at the world from different perspectives than the ones that have been ingrained in us. And once again, she succeeded not only by dint of using sophisticated metaphors, but because she's disarmingly, confidently outspoken. She makes a point of avoiding academic jargon and stepping outside the privileged bubble. For her, it is just a natural to describe the feelings. I admire her for not hesitating to acknowledge how angry some social attitudes make her, and I also like the fact that she can distinguish and express different degrees of anger. She's more outraged by sexism than racism because, as she says in her feminist manifesto in 15 suggestions, people around me often acknowledge that racism is problematic, but I don't see a sexism in this way, she has written. We teach girls to be likable, to be nice, to be false, and we don't teach boys the same. This is dangerous. Many girls spend too much time trying to be nice to people who do them harm. Many girls think of the feelings of those who are hurting them. That is the catastrophic consequence of likability. The depth and the earnestness of her thinking have made her one of the most relevant contemporary writers, unlike others who seem deliberately beyond dark recess of human existence, be it because the authenticity is cynical or because of worry that the suggestions of solutions or hope might be regarded as not artistic enough. Adichie shows us a way out, as if she has never stopped believing in what is known as a social contract. This faith persists in her work. The fact that changing the words of injustice is very slow and protracted process. It's a sign of enormous intelligence. She takes full responsibility for her own work and her own existence, but she also tells us that it is never good enough to shrug our shoulders, that she's not buying our excuses, and she expects us to be responsible and to meet all the obligations the contract has placed on us.
Ďakujem veľmi pekne Márii Modrovich. A teraz mi
Thank you, Mária Modrovich. And now the representative of the Central European Foundation will take the floor and he will tell you more about the prize. Good evening. I will not tell you so much about the prize because the prize will speak for itself, as you will see. But let me say a few sentences anyway. Today is an exceptional day. And at this moment, it is even more exceptional because we have this opportunity to pay tribute to our distinguished guest. We at the Central European Foundation consider it a great honor and privilege to be able to award the prize of honorary Central European to a writer who is inspiring because of her fearless courage to tell the way the things are. She also gives us her personal view of the diversity of this world. The freedom is something that we have been trying to define for 30 years, and we are looking for the true meaning of the word in our everyday lives, also in the life of society as well as in the life of families. Ms. Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie gives us courage. She incites us to free ourselves from some deeply ingrained customs or habits or something that seems to be the only established truth. She gives us a great gift with her work, and therefore on behalf of our foundation and also in my own name, I would like to thank Adichie very much.
Well, you told me I could call you Chimamanda on stage.
Yes.
I will do so. Chimamanda, how is it to be here in Bratislava and to be welcomed as an honorary Central European?
When do I get the passport? I just want to say how meaningful and lovely it is for me to be here, and particularly to be here today, on a day that means so much to you. The wonderfully passionate reading of my work felt like a gift. And this, I think really for me, it's just this feeling of being a part of, for many years I've read about this part of the world, I think as most people have, and I've always been deeply admiring of the grit and the courage that it takes to stand up and rise up against a system that is inhumane.
And it was unimaginable that it would fall.
Yes. But I think for me, that it's an example, it's a testament to what collective human will can achieve. And so what this means for me is simply that I kind of now can have a tiny, tiny, tiny slice of this courageous grit. But of course, I have a Nigerian passport. And traveling to any part of Europe with a Nigerian passport is an exercise in disaster.
It's getting more complicated, I think, huh?
So I didn't come directly to. So when I left, I guess my point is that had my first entry into Europe been here, then I would actually be in a position to say something about Slovakia.
Sure.
But when I arrived in Switzerland, which was my first point of entry on this trip, and every time I travel and every time I get to Europe, I'm immediately tense because I'm expecting to be questioned, to be asked to show my return ticket. I'm expecting the assumption that I'm lying when I say that I'm a writer. But what happened in Zurich, and I'm constantly watching to see what's happening with the people ahead of me in line. And for the first time in a long time, the immigration officer treated me in exactly the same way as he treated the two white people ahead of me. And I left that experience feeling this kind of ridiculous sense of gratitude. And then later I felt a sadness that I should feel gratitude for having been treated with just basic human dignity. And it made me think about how much all everyone wants is just that basic, normal human dignity. I don't know, it was sort of a striking moment for me because I felt so grateful. I wanted to hug him. Like, thank you for not being rude.
It's so ambivalent, huh? Yeah. But as we just heard, as this whole city right now these days is full of memories of the unimaginable that happened 30 years ago, and about how this whole society has been trying to figure out what freedom actually means. And I hear many people here, I'm not from here, but I hear many people here saying we still haven't figured it out. It is still such, stories like yours are still here of people wanting, trying, fighting to achieve what should be the most normal thing in the world. How do you address people? You don't know these people, but how do you address people to continue defining what freedom means?
One of the things I'm curious about is why what happened here? Why is there a reasonable woman in power when you're surrounded by countries that have people who are not terribly reasonable in power? I find that really admirable. This is actually why I came to this country, because I'm very curious and very interested. But really, I think it's important for people in Central Europe to know that what has happened in their history has been inspirational to people in other parts of the world, and that I don't think freedom is necessarily something that one captures and then holds in one's hands. I think it's a constant journey. I think this idea of figuring it out is what it should be. And while we celebrate 30 years, it's actually not that long. It really isn't. And I think that as human beings, we live with our histories. We're constantly negotiating with our histories. And it seems to me that the fact that that circumstances are not perfect, for me, is never reason for despair. Never. Because it's also important to look back and think, look what we've achieved, look where we are. I mean, just reading about the Velvet Revolution, I remember thinking, really? I mean, really, it happened. You know, and there's something about it that is, I find, just gloriously inspiring. And I think it's important to remember that. I know that we're living in times that are difficult. I think there are parts of this continent that are terrifying to me reading about them, because they really remind me of reading about Europe in the 1930s. But maybe it's all the more reason to sort of put despair aside and keep forging forward. I think what's happening in the US, for example, is that the response to a certain kind of right-wing populism introduced by the American president is that many women have started organizing. Women who would never have thought about running for office are running for office. And so I think there is something to be said. Obviously, one would want the inspiration for civic participation not to be right-wing populism, right? I mean, it would be nice if women just ran for office without having to rise up against the demagogue. But it seems to me that in this time in Europe, there are many things that are sad, and but also there's a sense in which there are opportunities.
One of the opportunities, one of the special things here was indeed, as you mentioned, the new president. She was elected last year. President Zuzana Čaputová sat in this same chair here last night, and she spoke with dignity and seriously, and in very diplomatic terms, because she's president. She criticized the behavior of political parties towards the elections that are going to happen in 3 months. So yes, she's a shining example. There is this other side, of course, to the story. This might be a stretch. I'm trying to connect the themes that you write about with the situation that we find here. This might be a stretch. If it's nonsense, skip it. Because people describe to me this country, Slovakia, as a place of many beauties. The nature, the cities, the history, the people, the president. But also as a country that has gone through totalitarian rule. It's a country with huge income inequality. There's great differences between cities and countryside. There's a strong religious grip on communities. Traditional patriarchy rules. There is corruption throughout society. So, just saying, freedom's not perfect yet.
It sounds like you described my country, Nigeria.
Well, I didn't want to...
It's true.
When I hear this and I'm reading your work and the way you describe Nigeria, there's obvious differences, but some similarities. And then, you're growing up in a society like that with some of these characteristics. You could have chosen to become a politician or a lawyer or an investigative journalist, but you decided to become a storyteller, a novelist. Why?
Because I think it's what I was born to do. In some ways, I don't think I chose writing. Writing chose me. When I was 4 years old, I knew. I think some people know and some people sort of figure it out later. I was one of those people who just knew that this is what I wanted to do. But I also, because I grew up in a world that was very practical, where if you said you wanted to be a writer, people looked at you very funny, like, writer, how are you going to pay your bills? And so my plan had been that I would go along with all the expectations placed on me, which was to become a doctor. In Nigeria, if you do well in school, they tell you you have to be a doctor. And so I had sort of planned to be a doctor and then write at night. But then it sort of, and I guess it ended up working out that I didn't end up becoming a doctor. But
writing chose you, but then you chose to write against these evils that are plaguing society.
Do you know, when I'm writing, it's not, so that for me there are two, when I'm writing fiction, which is my first love, and which is the thing that in many ways brings meaning to my life, I'm not really thinking about, I'm not sort of thinking I shall now write against the evils of society. I'm thinking I want to tell stories of people. Yeah. And the reality of the world that I write about, and I think really, the reality of human beings in the world is that we don't exist in a vacuum. We're all products of our political and social worlds. And even our emotional worlds, I think, are shaped by what's outside of us. You know, I'm interested in, for example, if you're living in a totalitarian society, what does it do to the way that you love? What does it do to love? If you're living in a place where the default is distrust, you know, in a low-trust society, how does it shape your interactions with other human beings? And I'm interested in that sort of thing. And of course, having grown up in a military dictatorship in Nigeria, Nigeria's last military dictator died in 1998, and that's about when I left Nigeria. There's a sense in which you become, you're shaped by it. And when I was young, I remember my father was a professor. I grew up on a university campus. And I remember when my parents' friends would come to visit, the doors would be closed. We lived in a big house, but they would whisper because they were talking about political things. And as a child, that stays with you. And the part of me that's very interested in storytelling, for me, that is what it means to live in a system that is oppressive, that you cannot speak in your normal tone of voice. Even when it makes no sense to whisper, you whisper, right? And I think as a storyteller, that I was drawn by things like that.
Yeah, and I think everything you're describing now will resonate with people here who remember, who experienced totalitarianism, communism. People whispering in their own living rooms. But then this other thing, beautiful question or complicated question, how do you love when you live under totalitarianism? Mária Modrovich just now in her Laudatio also said what sets you apart from many of the readers that she writes, writers that she reads, is that they are great in writing about doom and gloom and everything that is wrong in this world. But you stand out because you show us a way forward. And I would add, I know very few writers who write so beautifully about love as you do. But incredible, really, I have to say that. Half of a Yellow Sun, Amerikánka, the love stories, you will know if you've read them. You start glowing. You start glowing when you read those. And now in this context, I suddenly get the feeling it's maybe too big to say writing about love is an act of resistance in itself, but in a way it might be.
It is. Oh, it is. It absolutely is. And it might, you know, this is the thing about, I'm also increasingly wary of that idea that if one occupies an intellectual space, one has to hide behind irony and cynicism about the more emotional parts of our lives, you know. So I know that there are intellectuals who will be very, very uncomfortable about talking about this because it's a bit too earnest. So we have to sink back into irony and cynicism, and I don't have time for that. I think that writing about love, because in the end, what does it mean to be human? I think one thing that I believe runs through all of us as humans is that we want to be valued. We want to be valued. And I think not only do we want to receive value, we want to give a sense of value. In other words, we want to love and be loved. And especially in a society, in a political system that is trying to take away from you your very humanity. If you're living in a place that's telling you you cannot think, telling you you cannot say certain things, in some ways then when you choose to write, and the other thing, of course, is that love happens anyway. I remember when I was researching the Nigeria-Biafra War of the 1960s for my novel, Half of a Yellow Sun. And, you know, I was young, and for some reason I thought that, and I was in many ways kind of in awe of the political backdrop to the war, how, you know, this region of Nigeria, my region, wanted to secede, and people just rose up and were so fiercely independent. And then my parents were talking about it, and they said, oh, and we went for this wedding during the war. And I thought, wait, what? Right, because in my mind, I'd forgotten people were getting married, people were falling in love while war raged. In other words, people were holding on to their humanity. And I find I think it's one of the things that really interests me as a storyteller, how human beings continue to remain human, you know.
Read those novels. I mean, read the manifesto, read We Should All Be Feminists, but read the novels. I know they're translated into Slovak, fortunately, so read them and glow when you read about love. But to return to this struggle for liberty, for freedom. Right here, this country, we mentioned the president. Just an hour before you arrived, I was at a huge rally just down the road that campaigns for a decent Slovakia, against corruption, against injustice, against inequality. That too was run by young women. So this is a society where women at certain moments can succeed in fighting patriarchy. What do you say to women? What do you say to women to encourage them that there is something beyond irony and cynicism?
I think if they're organizing these things, they kind of already know. But I'm just going to say that you have to remember that people are applauding you, people like me. I find it, I think, to be, because I think of myself as, like I said earlier, a storyteller. I'm a writer, I'm a novelist. This kind of new identity of activism is one I kind of feel ambivalent about, because I'm not even sure I'm very good at it. I think real activists are really serious people, right? And it's hard for me to take myself that seriously. But one of the I think drawbacks of becoming this public, I guess, symbol for feminism in particular, is that it can be lonely. It can feel incredibly lonely, because in my particular experience, with the people that I know and love, who are the people that you, in general, want to you want them to believe what you believe. But I find that even the people I know and love, my friends, they often want me to defend feminism. They want me to prove that sexism exists. And things that seem to me very obvious, that something has happened to this person because this person is a woman. And you know, invariably somebody's saying to me, well, are you sure, really? As though somehow women like sexism, so they just invent it, you know. But so to hear stories like this, so I guess my point is, if there is a message here for women in this country, it's to say to them, knowing that you're there is wonderful for me and people like me. And I hope that for you, it's also wonderful to know that people like me are there, because the most important thing is to know that you're not alone. That the people who share your values, the people who believe as you do, that men and women are equal, that women are full human beings, that we have to allow women to be full human beings, to make decisions about their bodies and their lives, because they're full human beings. And so, yeah, I'm just, keep doing.
Yeah. You're now an honorary Central European, so you can walk the streets and spread the message. But then to take it one step further, you've also written about this. A lot of people in the world, all over the world, no matter what society, have a problem with women in power. Women are nice, good for whatever, but as soon as they realize their true ambitions and take that power, then what happens?
Then they get a lot of, then there's censure, then they are quote unquote punished. In Nigeria, women are in positions of power. There are women who head banks, who head corporations, we don't have a governor who's a woman, but we have ministers who are women. But what's interesting about observing Nigerian women in power is that every time they're asked about their work publicly, they are always expected to say that while they think their work is very important, the most important job is to their husband or to their children. So you'll often have women say, I love that I have this position, but the most important thing for me is to go home and cook for my husband. And I find this to be a performance, but it's a performance that is almost necessary for their survival, because what it means is that a woman who is powerful has to make herself non-threatening. And the way to do that is to reduce herself to domesticity. Because automatically when a woman is powerful, she threatens. And it's a terrible thing, because I think what it proves is that our world is so misogynistic that we cannot deal with the idea of a woman in power. And by the way, this is something that women get from men and women. So there are many women, we live in a misogynistic world. I think of it as misogyny is in the air and we're all breathing it in. And so women too attack women in power, judge them much more harshly. I was reading a study in the US about women seeking power, and this happened to Hillary Clinton. It's happening now to Elizabeth Warren, where when they start to rise in the polling, and when women are asked about them, the judgment is so harsh. And it's also interesting how the language of like is used often for women. I mean, America has a president that I would describe as just almost impossible to like, but he's not spoken of in those terms. But it's incredible how often one hears, I don't like Hillary Clinton, I don't like Elizabeth Warren. So it becomes this sort of referendum on likability when it shouldn't be. This is not a contest for likability. But also, I think it proves our reaction to women in power across the world proves why we need feminism. And also shows us, in a very blatant way, the double standards that exist in the world. When I was growing up, there was a professor on campus who was a woman, and people often said, I don't like her. And they would say she's very aggressive and arrogant. And there was a man who behaved exactly like her. And people said he's so authoritative and strong. And so as a child, I could see that the world judges men and women differently for the same behavior. Right? So it makes you realize that the judgment is not for the behavior. It's really about not liking women.
And you've written about this in all different ways. I want to, just in between, I want to grab this opportunity because it's a once in a lifetime. Next president of the United States, Elizabeth Warren, Hillary Clinton, or Michelle Obama?
I can tell you that Michelle Obama is not running.
Okay, but if they were all running.
No, that's not fair.
Okay. Just curious. You've written about them, and they are,
I think they're all, obviously there are three women, all of whom I admire. Michelle Obama I love.
Okay. That's an answer. You yourself, I don't know if you would describe yourself as a woman with power, but you have power. How do you handle that? Including the response, the negative response to that.
Yes, a certain kind of power. Yes, well, actually, yes. Yes, I would concede that. I handle it in different ways. There are times I don't want to get out of bed. I just want to stay in bed and eat chocolates. I cannot believe how terrible people are. And then there are times when, really, in general, I have to keep reminding myself that there's a kind of criticism that you realize is really not about what you're saying. It's about the fact that you're a woman who dares to have an opinion. And it's also interesting to me to see that how often, especially in Nigeria, the response to things I say about feminism is shut up. So that there's this impulse to silence women. So you're not engaging, because I quite like a good argument. I want you to give me the opportunity to try and persuade you. But this refusal even to engage with the idea and just to say shut up, I constantly have to remind myself that it's in some ways these people are proving your point. But also it's a way of reminding myself that I have to keep going forward. And it's actually exactly when I'm told to shut up that I don't shut up.
And yeah. And it informs your writing, because, as I said earlier, your writing about love is incredibly beautiful, but your writing from a place of anger is also powered, is electrifying. It both works. Before we go to questions from the audience, I think this might be a moment talking about women who contributed. This little book has just been published. It is on sale at the entrance. The English title is Talking Back to 1989. It is about the role of women in the revolution, in the Velvet Revolution, a role that very often went unrecognized. So this book by Zuzana Majarova is a very important moment, I think, to reinstall the power and the influence and the value of the women who contribute to the Velvet Revolution. It's on sale after, at the end.
Is it in English?
No, it's not in English yet. But the summary is in English. I read the summary, it makes me very curious. So, if we could have some light on the audience, I don't know if that's possible. And if there is somebody walking around with a microphone, I'm super curious to hear some questions from the audience. Because I know Bratislava was excited that Chimamanda is coming. Okay, do I see 20 hands in the air? Not yet. Bit of light. Where's the microphone, by the way? Is it over there? Really hard to see. Hand over there, yeah? Ah, there's a hand over here. Okay, where's the mic? Yeah, where I can go. So here we are.
No dobre, ďakujem za mikrofón. Ja by som sa chcel opýtať, že...
Thank you very much for the mic. I would like to ask, what is your idea of democracy? Does democracy make it possible to do whatever you want? Because there is devastation, there is disorder.
I didn't get that. Did you get it?
Okay, so we will try once again. The question was, what do you understand under democracy? What is democracy for you today when we see people who do anything, murder, kill, destroy nature? What is, in your view, then democracy?
Essential question.
I mean, are people killing and destroying nature because of democracy? I would argue not. I think killing and destroying nature has happened under all kinds of political systems and structures. For me, democracy is not perfect, but it's the best that we have. And it means a system of government that recognizes the will of the people. For me, the concern today is that because we now live in a world where it's very easy to manipulate information, I think that our democracy is in peril. I think the idea that you have social media platforms that can be used to really manipulate people, manipulate information, spread false information. And when you have people voting under false pretenses, then it's no longer democracy. So if there's anything that troubles me today about democracies across the world, it is that.
Okay. We have another question here.
Hi, thank you for being with us. It's wonderful. My question is not out of curiosity. It is a bit intentional. And I do believe that you will understand why I'm asking. Is there any kind of important thing to say about the difference between woman and femininity? What is it, woman? And what is it, femininity? Does it belong to each other necessarily and only, or how it works? Thank you.
No, I don't. That's an interesting question. No, so to the question, does femininity belong only to women? No, I don't think it does. I think, I think men who choose to sort of perform femininity, that's perfectly fine and acceptable. No. I don't think so at all. What I do think is that we live in a world that doesn't give the same value to things that we traditionally consider feminine. The world doesn't give the same value to those things as it does to the things that we consider traditionally masculine. And I think in general it's because we've linked femininity to women and masculinity to men. And it's also, I think, why, for example, when I went to the US from Nigeria for the first time and wanted to get my short stories published, wanted to be part of sort of the literary world, I very quickly learned that if you're a woman and you wanted to be taken seriously as an intellectual in America, you could not also be seen as somebody who was interested in appearance. You could not like fashion. And I grew up in Nigeria in a world where you were supposed to care about your appearance. And so I started pretending not to care about femininity and started wearing clothes that were sort of, I would also say even maybe macho, because for me, I felt this is the only way they will take me seriously, and I want to be taken seriously. And so for me, the reason that I talk about femininity and feminism, and I say that femininity and feminism are not mutually exclusive, is because for so long, traditional feminism in the West has said to women that if you want to be taken seriously, you have to discard femininity. Fashion is frivolous, makeup is frivolous, high heels are frivolous. And then they tell you, oh, it's all about the male gaze. Actually, it isn't. That wonderful reading that Zuzana did, and also because I don't read my own work, so I'd kind of forgotten about that, so it's kind of funny to hear it again. But this idea of the male gaze, it made me think about how I wear clothes and my husband just starts laughing because he doesn't understand what the hell is going on. He's a good man, my husband, but he doesn't get it. And But women, other women like me who are interested in fashion and style get it. You wear a big balloon dress, and my husband goes, "What is that? A dress? Is it a shirt? What is it?" But then I meet a stylish woman, she's like, "Yes, girl," I think the women here who are interested in fashion know exactly what I'm talking about. And so I guess my point is that we really need to start to rethink that idea that every choice a woman makes is somehow about the male gaze. That is giving way too much power to the male gaze. So I talk about femininity not because I think it is the exclusive property of women. I don't. But only because I think it has been for too long diminished, and it's somehow forced women to pretend. I know that that there are many women like me who are interested in ideas, but who also like traditional femininity. And for me, my vision of feminism is one in which we have a large room to allow women to be whatever they want to be, and know that their ability will not be judged because of that. And so there's a lovely child walking across.
Oh.
Sorry, I think I had a child and suddenly I've fallen in love with all the children in the world. It's ridiculous. But so I think I've answered yes. Yes.
Okay. No, she's
so cute.
She is. She's a little miracle. Here's somebody else with a question, please. It's nice when people stand up, you can see them, yeah?
Yes.
Hello, my name is Veronica. Thank you for being here. I'm your great admirer. I hope this is the way to get your signature later. But my question is, I know you are here more as an activist, but I really love your work. And my question is, half of the Yellow Sun, when I was reading this novel, the whole way I was just thinking, was that a way for you to somehow become even with the past of your family, of your region? Because I felt that there was a lot of biographical work of your family, but I was still thinking, why to write this? And also one extra question is, how is it now when I cannot possibly imagine the nation or region trying to be separate and be pushed so badly, and how it can feel after so many years, because this is like we separated and never happened. But so I cannot imagine that, and this is what I love about the book. Thank you.
Thank you. I think your psychological analysis has quite a bit of merit. The part about wanting to get even. I'm a person who generally likes to get even. Forgiving I find very difficult. No. Actually, yes, that's true, but that's not what we're talking about. It's difficult again to talk about why I chose to write about Biafra. I grew up in the shadow. By the time I was born in 1977, the war had been over for 7 years. My parents lost everything they owned. My grandfathers died in the war. So I grew up with stories, but not specific things. So my mother would talk about the china and the silverware she lost in the war. And my father endlessly talked about his father, my grandfather. But then they didn't really talk about the specifics of the war. So I knew that this thing had taken my grandfathers, both of whom apparently were just really lovely men. But I didn't know exactly what had happened. I knew that my family had lost everything. I knew that there was a before the war and an after the war. But the war middle was very murky. So I think I wanted to make sense of it for myself in a very personal way. But I also, I think, wanted to tell the story for my generation of Nigerians, because we don't learn about it in school, in the way that I think every country has a part of their history that they're ashamed of. And in Nigeria, that's the part of our history that we're ashamed of. So we try to keep it silent. And if you talk about it, they tell you that you're a troublemaker and you're trying to bring back division, that kind of thing. So I think it was also my way of I wanted to start a conversation about our history. I find it deeply, I think that to know where we are and where we're going, we have to understand where we've been. And it seemed to me in Nigeria that we hadn't talked about that period, and that period really shapes so much about our present. The political structure in Nigeria today, you can trace back directly to 1970 when the war ended. And the second part of the question, which was...
This country was separated.
Oh, right,
Slovakia,
right.
But Slovakia was never forced back into the Union.
Right.
And in Biafra, that was the case.
What's happening now is that there is a neo-Biafran movement, which I think, and you know, the rhetoric of the movement is that they want separation. And it's mostly disaffected young men in southeastern Nigeria. And I think that that neo-Biafran movement is really less about secession and more about people reacting to this sense of being excluded. One of the legacies of that period is that there's a sense in which, if Nigerians are being honest, they will tell you cannot trust an Igbo man because, you know, the idea being they try to leave, so you cannot trust them. And there is also, in the political discourse in Nigeria, people will say things like, do you think we will ever have an Igbo president? So it's kind of, so all of those things are legacies of the war period. In general, ethnicity remains a problem in Nigeria, but my view is that it's not so much about ethnicity as it is when it's politicized. I think good leadership makes such a difference. If we had a leader who really made every part of Nigeria feel included, the New Biafran movement would not exist.
Mm-hmm. Thanks. Thank you. And again, so much of this resonates here that it's quite striking, actually. Question from you. Please get up so Chimamanda will see who's asking.
Ms. Adichie, I'm Sylvia, and when I've read your books, I think they are not only intelligent and insightful, they're also very beautiful.
Thank you.
In terms of language. And I can compare it only maybe to Fitzgerald, but you make more sense to me in this world. And what I wanted to ask is, how did you acquire this beautiful language? Are you a passionate reader? And if yes, who brought you and who inspired you to read?
I don't remember when I wasn't reading. Right? So my earliest memories of childhood are memories of me with a book. But I was lucky. I was lucky that I grew up in a university. And I grew up on a university campus, so I had access to books. I was lucky that my best friend's father was a professor of literature, so they had a home library just full of wonderful books. I was lucky that I had the Children's Center library on campus as well that I went to. My father is a professor of mathematics, so it's not like we had novels lying around the house, right? We had, you know, very thick journals about statistics. But I think I grew up in a family that deeply values learning. And I think this is true for many Igbo families in Nigeria. There's a sense in which when colonialism came, Igbo people were very quick to sort of adapt. And suddenly, Western education became the thing. So families will spend the last bit of money they have to educate their children. So there's a kind of this, you know, learning is a good thing. So go get a book, right? So I think I was fortunate that I happened to be born into a space that encouraged something that I really like to think that I was blessed with, which is this desire to read and write.
All of these questions deserve much, much longer answers than we are allowed to give here. Just checking with Miriam or Andrea, 10 minutes? Okay, cool.
I'll keep them short, I promise, so I can get to everyone.
No, but it's great to listen. Now, this gentleman here has brought his own mic, so go ahead.
Okay, I hope it works. Yeah. So I got very intrigued by the thing that you say that you love to discuss and to argue with different people about your opinions. And I love it as myself as well. I love to overcome misconceptions and try to explain them in a reasonable manner. But I found myself for the past few weeks and months not doing so much because I found that it's super hard to explain something to people when they're already decided on their opinion. So I would like to ask you, how do you deal with the situation where you obviously see you cannot win the argument, but you want to propel your message forward?
You know, try punching them. No, that's a joke.
No, yeah.
You know, my general So especially, and this happens to me mostly in talking about sexism, right? When I talk about feminism, and I get a lot of pushback. I've decided that there are different groups of people. There is a small group that I have made peace with the fact that I will never be able to reach them. So there's no point, right? And you can tell, you start a conversation and you can tell when there's no point. But there's a much larger group, I think, of people who you might think they're set in their ways, but there's a small crack where they're willing to listen. With those people, I will try. And I'm a believer in storytelling. And I often say to women who are my fellow feminists, I say to them, let's go to story. Right? Don't do the theory, especially with people who are not in your little bubble of theorizing, because you're going to lose them. And in the end, what's the point of all this? The point of all this is to get people on board because we want to change the world. I don't care how melodramatic that sounds, but it's true. That's what I want to do. I want a just world. I want to walk towards a just world, which means that we want to get people on board. And if you're going to use language that people don't understand, you will not get them on board. So I use storytelling. I usually and often it's men who think, women just use feminism to try and reduce men and hate men. I find storytelling and humor works. So I start, if I do a bit of teasing, and I usually try to make the stories about them. So I'm like, what was the last thing that really annoyed you about how women use feminism to destroy men? And then if they're willing to give me an example, we start working with that. I think that generally really works well. Story works well. And I think also giving people alternative stories. And maybe the last thing is remembering that a person can have a bad idea, but that person isn't necessarily a bad person. I think it's really because that shapes the way you talk to them. Yeah.
Yeah. And you'll see it also in the manifesto and let's say the non-fiction you write. Those two are full of stories. So it's the argument and the story. Choose the right moment. I think one more question here, and you already have a microphone, I believe.
I already have a mic, yes. Hi.
Hi.
So you just talked about what can help change people's minds. And in my opinion, that is a part of what makes a great fiction. But I would be very much interested in what makes great fiction in your opinion. And if you could maybe also share one or two of your favorites.
Every time I'm asked that, I go blank, and then I'm going to leave the stage and think, my God, I could have told them about that novel. Maybe I can tell you about a novel I love from this part of the world. Magda Szabo, I'm probably not pronouncing it well, S-Z-A-B.
Marta Szabo?
Szabo, yes.
Sounds Hungarian?
Yes, yes. Szabo. So Magda Szabo, yes. So I quite like her fiction. I really like Catalan Street. What makes for good fiction for me, it's what I call emotional truth. And it's very hard to define, but I can tell when I see it. It's a kind of refusal to... sometimes one can tell a writer that is watching herself, and is a kind of layers of self-consciousness. And I often find that off-putting as a reader because I'm unable to get into the world. I find emotional honesty to be really moving, and a kind of just human storytelling where human beings are messy, where nothing is, where it's messy because the world is messy. I'm always suspicious of books in which characters are a bit too good, because then it immediately makes me distrust the entire world of the fiction because I'm thinking, come on, really? Yeah, and another book I love, maybe I'll just talk about a book I recently read, a novel I loved. See, I told you I would blank. Right, okay, there's a novel I love which I think the writer is Polish. And the novel is called The Beautiful Mrs. Seidenman. Again, I'm not pronouncing it well. S-E-I-D-E-M-A-N. And his name is very long, and I'm not even going to try and pronounce it, but I find it to be a very gorgeous novel, and especially now that I'm still interested in how we write the memory of trauma, collective trauma, and that book, which is about the Second World War, I find really beautiful. Oh, and another novel I'm going to suggest is by a Nigerian woman, and it's called The Secret Lives of Baba Shegi's Wives. It's a wonderful, funny, feminist, true account of this man who's who's polygamous, and how that really works out.
Can you give us a title once more?
The Secret Lives of Baba Shegi. Shegi is S-E-G-I. Shegi's Wives. And the writer is Lola Shonei.
Lola Shonei. Final question, and it's over here, so you should be able to get that mic in the right direction.
Hi.
Thanks.
Thank you. I'm Lucia. So I would like to ask you a question. I myself work in an industry that it's, let's say, considered as a man industry, that it was always ruled by men, and they are always bringing me down. But what I've noticed throughout my career, that it's not only the men who bring women down, but it's also the women themselves. Like they consider each other a competition, something that they just don't see you as a friend. They don't want you good, but they see you as, you understand?
Yes.
So I would like to know, how do you cope with situations like that, and what is your advice? Thank you.
I try to, again, it really depends on my mood. If I'm in a bad mood, I do not deal with it well. I'm not even joking. But in general, what I like to remind myself of is who's benefiting from this system. It's men. So when women pull other women down, it's not women who are benefiting, because the person who pulls you down is not benefiting. It's still a system that benefits men, and there's something about it that is very sad, because women are complicit in their own oppression. But I also, and again, this is when I'm sort of being expansive about it and theoretical, is I also say to myself, we have to remember that if it is true that we live in a patriarchy, if it is true that misogyny is in the air we breathe, then we cannot expect, and if it is also true that we reject this idea that women have to be held at a higher standard, right? Because actually when listening to the praise directed at the president, which I'm sure is worthy, I started to feel ever so slightly uncomfortable, because I thought, my God, I hope she hasn't been elevated to sainthood because she's a woman, because we do that quite a bit, where, so this woman gets into power, suddenly she's wonderful, she's perfect, and the standards are so high that she's not allowed to fail. And that in itself, for me, is misogynistic. Right? So I think if I believe in all of these things, then I have to, in some ways, not excuse, but understand why women do that. A dear friend of mine, one of my closest friends in the whole world, who died recently, his name was Binyavanga Wainaina, and he was a Kenyan writer. And I remember I was so hurt about something a woman I had supported had done to me. I was just so, and I was baffled by it. And he looked at me and he said, your problem is that your default is to forgive women, and your default is to trust women. And he was saying it like you shouldn't, you know? And it made me think that he was right. And I started to wonder, is there a misogyny there where I'm thinking, how could she have done it? If a man had done it, I'd be like, you know? And but it can be difficult. I think it's important to surround oneself with good people, with like-minded people, especially for women. And I was saying earlier about how important it is to know that you're not alone. It's really important, especially if you make the choice to be a woman who, you know, pushes back at the world, who chooses to do things for herself, who chooses to deal with that guilt. I think that women across cultures are socialized to have when we want something for ourselves. There's a guilt there because we've been socialized for so long to put ourselves, you know, you can't want too much. So it's important, I think, to find, I find people, I surround myself with people, women and men, who kind of are not terribly catty, you know? Women who generally like other women. And women who are on the same journey of unlearning all of the things that we've learned in our socialization as women. I often say that I'm still in that process of unlearning. I am still in it because it's difficult. It's difficult. You've been told your whole life every woman you see is competition, which is such nonsense. But it's something that's there somewhere. You've sort of been socialized to think that another woman's success somehow takes something away from you when it doesn't, right? And there's a kind of, so I can talk about Nigeria, for example. My core supporters, as a public sort of person who talks about feminism, not so much my literature, because that's kind of almost neutral. But when I started talking about feminism, my public image in Nigeria changed drastically from, this writer that everybody was proud of because she wrote these novels to this controversial, crazy woman. And my core supporters are women. My core detractors are women, right? And it's not pleasant, because you're thinking what I'm standing for publicly is a system that will benefit you, so why aren't you supporting me? But you also remember that it's a complicated thing. There's some women for whom what you're doing is a judgment on their own lives because they've been socialized their whole lives to think, don't dare to want more, don't dare to speak. And now this woman is out there speaking, how dare she? Because now your very presence is a judgment on them, and they don't like it. So they're like, she's crazy, we need to, all of that. But you have to keep going, right? I mean, it can be difficult, but you have to keep going. That was wrong. I meant for it to be.
Honorary Central European Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie. Thank you so much.
Thank you.